what you're suggesting here is that these airlines are looking at the halcyon days pre-2019 or pre-2020, I should say, and you're suggesting that those days are never going to come back and that aviation and the airline industry itself has to essentially rethink the business. Tell us how and why you say that.
Yeah, so thanks, Richard, for having me again. Look, I mean, many of us travel a lot. Many of us are used to traveling a lot. Many of us have family that travel a lot, and anyone you talk to is rethinking the way they travel. And as long as this pandemic goes on, the more we also discover new ways to travel, think about traveling closer to home, regionally, and so on. So that's all changing the travel behavior. And because it's going on for a longer time, we can see that it's starting to develop a whole new approach to travel for people. People are looking at new substitutions and so on. The challenge with the industry is that when you listen to most industry executives out in public, they talk about when will we get back to 2019 levels of numbers, right? So they're talking about, some say it'll be 1 year, some say 2, and more people are starting to lean towards 3 years to 5 years. My view is anyone who's talking about even using 2019 as a reference point is stuck in the past. Things are going to be different for a very long time, if not permanently. And that's all about, where people will travel, how they will travel, and what reason they will use to travel. And the airlines that understand that faster than others, I think, will emerge out of this better. The challenge we've got with all the billions of dollars, euros, yen that have been given to all these airlines is that as the airlines continue to be stuck in this and rethinking how to get back to 2019, in essence, what they're doing is wasting all that money instead of deploying it in new business models, new travel modes, and things like that.
Well, absolutely. So how does the business model evolve? And if we get a vaccine, does it really ultimately these business plans have to change?
Look, I think no one knows when the vaccine's coming. We don't know what the efficacy of the vaccine is going to be. We don't know how long it's going to protect people. What we're seeing with very certain, I'm not a doctor, but most of what I'm reading is that even people who have antibodies are being reinfected 3 months later. And then we often have different types of strains. So I think there's too many people just waiting around and hoping that there'll be this, either the virus will disappear. It probably will at some point as it continues to evolve into a virus that becomes perhaps less harmless to us. The second is eventually we may have viruses that have, that will solve 70, 80% of the different strains. But, at what point do we get to the point where we have a virus that's we can develop the antibodies in our body that are going to last us long enough that we don't need to have multiple shots all the time. And then you're hearing all throughout Europe and through North America, because of this sense of individualism, where you have large proportions of the population saying that they won't take vaccines. So I think in many countries, we're looking at 50% of the population refusing to take vaccines. So I think, banking on a magical pill or a vaccine coming along and fixing all these problems is unrealistic, and the industry needs to think about how it's going to manage till then.
Shakeel, the aviation industry says that with the way that air filters work, etc., that aircraft are actually safer than being on the ground. So why can't we open up more now?
Look, I think we have to be very careful about the way the air filter argument is being made, and that's a much longer conversation I'm happy to have at another time. But look, the industry, I think, needs to do a better job at explaining that. We need to have, let's get an independent study. We've seen a Japanese university show us all what aerosols look like in the air. Let's get an independent study, not paid for by the airline industry, that shows what happens in the cabin. And until that happens, I think it's very difficult for the industry to be convincing people that it's all safe to travel. And even if it is safe in the cabin, I took a trip in August to see what this was going to be like, and it was absolute disaster at the airports. So you've got crowds of people pushing each other to get onto planes. So it doesn't really matter how good the air filters are on the plane if the journey to the plane and off the plane, waiting for your bag and so on, people aren't distancing, people aren't wearing masks, people are touching each other. So, the whole travel chain has to be rethought.
Shakeel, we have government considering travel bubbles. What do you make of them? And, some say there are loopholes because some hubs actually allow travelers to travel through.
Yeah, look, I think travel bubbles were a fantastic idea, and New Zealand did an incredible job of getting the virus to an extremely low level. In fact, even here in Germany, we did a really great job until the school holidays. And you could imagine that if, one country had really closed borders and another country had closed borders, and they both got the virus down to a really low level, then of course this would be a fantastic opportunity to allow a travel corridor. New Zealand, Australia is a perfect example of what could be done. The challenge you've got is that New Zealand is highly isolated, and so they're able to control the reinfection rates within the country. Australia, on the other hand, is a very large country, and although there are lots of travel restrictions around the world, there are so many loopholes to getting in and out. So, I took a trip to Greece in August, imagining that borders to Europe were closed, yet there were so many Americans and Canadians all around us. And I was asking myself how that's possible. And the reality is there are so many ways to get in. So until we can figure out how to keep those bubbles closed and then open up a travel corridor, I think what we're starting to see is that the travel bubble idea hasn't been developed well enough to the point that it can be implemented.
In the end, we could see fewer airlines, fewer traffic, more safety measures, more costs for airlines. Essentially, that means higher cost for the consumer, for the travelers as well. Will it end up being, travel only for the elite?
No, I think what we see is, we're seeing two speeds starting to develop. I mean, I've always been a strong proponent for the fact that I believe, to a large extent, the industry has been on an unsustainable growth path. There have been bubbles of unserved demand within the world, but at a global level, we've just been making travel far too easy and far too cheap. I mean, it's gotten to the point where, traveling by airplane and getting there really fast was cheaper than having to take 4 buses and multiple trains and so on. So, the convenience factor, the quality of travel factor wasn't being priced in. I think in the long term, we need to plan for the fact that fewer people are going to travel, primarily because of the health issues, and airlines need to readjust. I think this is the age of smaller aircraft, and airlines that have, narrow bodies, C-Series or Airbus 220 aircraft, turboprops, they will do really well in the short term.